Hello, everyone. I'm Eric Cox. I'm a member of the Net Capital team. Let's allow one moment for everyone to settle in. Thanks. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome again. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, I'm excited to welcome Luke Hohmann, founder and CEO of First Root. As always, this company is actively raising capital on the Net Capital platform. You can go directly to netcapital.com/companies/FirstRoot-Inc. or go to netcapital.com and search First Root. I have a few quick housekeeping items. Please do use the Q&A functionality built into Zoom. I know there's also a chat feature, but Q&A makes it so much easier to make sure that we get to as many questions as we can. And of course, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please do ask those questions. I'll try to get to all of them. With all that being said, please join me in welcoming First Root to the stage. Come on in, Luke. Please tell us about First Root.
Hi, Eric. How are you today? I got to warn everyone, Eric and I are both in sunny California, so we're having a good day today. I'm really excited to be here. Eric, I thought maybe I could share my screen and talk a little bit about some of the deep motivations and then some of the opportunity behind First Root. And then from there, we can explore some of the questions from the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I want to give just a couple of pieces of information. For those of us in the media are aware right now, we know that there's a massive wealth gap between people of color and white people. And we know that it actually got significantly worse because of COVID. And what's interesting is that Americans will look at this and we tend to think, oh, this is an American problem, but it's actually a global problem. If you look at some of the social science research from a book called The Spirit Level, you see that there's this really big set of issues where these researchers looked at economic and income inequality, and they correlated it to health and social problems. So you start to see some of this massive problem in our society associated with economic equality, things like obesity or trust or opiate addiction. They're all correlated. And I think of this as 2/3 of the problem. So then the question becomes, well, why aren't we making changes and why aren't we making progress? And where's the other 1/3 of the problem? Well, the other 1/3 of the problem is we are plummeting in our belief that democracy is a good institution. And we're seeing this lack of trust in civic engagement and democracies being a global problem around the world that is affecting how we interact. So what is, how might we solve this problem? Well, if you look in the US, let's go back to the US, we see that one of the manifestations of the problems that I just talked about are things like paying a lot more money in bank fees and credit card interest. We see multiple president administrations saying, look, we need to teach financial literacy. We see global economic organizations like the OECD talking about financial literacy. So you have a lot of people saying, look, we know that financial literacy is a real root cause solution to this root cause problem. So then we look at, well, how are we doing? And in the US, focusing a little bit on the US, we see very few states are doing a good job because there is yet no national mandate. So there's this tremendous opportunity to create a better solution. Well, what would that entail? Well, if you look at how financial literacy is taught, it's taught being through facts. And this is known in educational terms as drill and kill. Right? You learn what you need. You learn the facts that you need for the test. You take the test, you pass. But financial literacy is a life skill. It needs the ability to look at things like investments, and you need to understand a little bit about yourself. On the financial side, are you more conservative or more, on the financial side, are you more risk averse or more risk tolerant? On the financial side, do you want your investments to be aligned with your values, like a social impact investor, or do you care only about how much money you make? And on the civic side, you need to know, well, who are you as a person? Are you more a more conservative or more liberal? These are all life skills. And the way that we solve this problem is through this radical approach that's very direct and very simple. We teach kids how to manage money by giving them money to manage. And we do this through an integrated curriculum and a beautiful app. And we're pleased to say that our app was running on a website in Chrome and browsers, but we just got released this week into the Apple iOS store, and we're in negotiation and going through the process of getting into the Android store. So we have a beautiful app designed for kids with an integrated curriculum that supports them in doing participatory budgeting. And this is really important for all of the listeners to know and all of our potential investors to know. We don't walk up to the kids and say, hey, kids, here's some money, figure it out, because that doesn't achieve the learning objective. What we do is we guide them through a structured process where the kids plan how they want to improve their school. The kids go through ideas, they refine those ideas, they vote, and then they implement those ideas in their school. And this is where questions from adults come in and they say, hey, do the kids spend money wisely? And the answer is yes. And Eric, I'm going to pause for a moment because sometimes what the kids choose is really profound. We just completed a program with the Academy of American Studies in Queens, New York. And the kids went through this process, and the thing that they voted for was more feminine care hygiene products in the girls' bathroom. And I remember, this is very personal because I remember bringing that to my family at dinner, and I said, look at what happened. And my wife smiled and she said, oh, honey, you're kind of clueless because you're a man, and let me help you out. I know educators want to talk about, and administrators and people on the outside, they want to talk about chemistry equipment and science equipment and AI helping teachers, but that's not what kids need. If you're a young woman and you are menstruating and you don't have the right feminine care products, you're not even going to go to school. You're just going to call in sick. And I'm not asserting that the administrators or the teachers in the academy don't care about their kids. What I am saying is very simple. Without student voice, especially when you're looking at ESSER funding and the notion that ESSER funding is putting money into schools to help improve the school environment and to help recover for lost learning, without student voice, we can't make the right choices. So continuing, right? This approach allows us to integrate financial literacy, civics, and design thinking, and we create really wonderful things. Because it's a project-based learning approach, because it's based on student-generated ideas and student outcomes, we see the kids really engaging with the most fundamental aspects of budgeting and civics and financial literacy that are available. Now, one of the questions that people come up with are, well, where does this money come from, right? If we're going to give money to the kids, where does it come from? Well, it comes from the discretionary portion of the school principal or school district budget. It comes from PTAs and PTOs, and it even comes from corporate social responsibility programs. We are running a program right now in Hillsdale High School in San Mateo, California, where a Salesforce executive made a donation to the school and Salesforce matched it. So that school now has $3,000 for their participatory budgeting program supported by Salesforce. And there's these corporate social responsibility programs that really do want to see kids improve. Now, there's some regulatory trends and some macroeconomic trends that are positioning First Root for massive success. In New York State, ESA schools are required to implement a PB program. And in Phoenix Union, they canceled their school resource officer program. And a school resource officer is a euphemism. It means there's a police officer in the school. And the idea is I'm going to make the school environment more safe by putting a police officer in, but the data says otherwise. The data says that when you put a police officer in the school, you push the problem to the boundary of the school. And what this community is doing is they're saying, no, why don't we engage students? Why don't we engage teachers? Why don't we engage parents in figuring out how to make that school safer? And we're seeing participatory budgeting integrated into curriculum. In New York City, the Department of Education has released a Civics for All curriculum, a half semester curriculum that integrates as its foundation participatory budgeting as the means by which we're teaching kids about civics. So there's a lot of interesting trends that are going on right now. Now, we know that you cannot succeed in ed tech without supporting teachers. It's just not possible. So when we took a design thinking approach to ed tech, we started with teachers and students, and we made sure that we've got materials for teachers, we've got a curriculum for teachers, that students are engaged, and we're at a price point that they can afford. Our pricing model is very straightforward. To get started, you can start with a single classroom at $1 a student. Schools can have unlimited programs, integrated curriculum, and additional capabilities like single sign-on and other things that make it easier to manage and administer the program. And then there's a managed budget at the network level. And a network of schools would be, say, a charter school network or a school district. Now, I want all of the people on the call to know that we are a public benefit corporation, kind of like Patagonia, a similar style. We're here to make a profit, but we're also here to have a social benefit. So our family edition is free, and this enables families to do participatory budgeting, like planning a family vacation or planning charitable donations at home using the same techniques that the kids are learning in school. Couple more things. We're making great progress. We've integrated social media. So we're seeing kids use our app and sharing what they're doing in what is natural to kids, things like Instagram, Snapchat, Discord, things like that. And we're creating a tech approach, meaning it's a self-service process. Teachers can go download our app and start using it directly with the support that we're providing through the app and the website. Now, as we grow, we can unlock larger budgets. Eric, if I give $25, I'm sorry, if I give a class of 25 kids each $10, that class has $250. And they'll learn about participatory budgeting and make the classroom better. If I give a school $10,000, those kids can do something really meaningful for the school. It's not so much money, right? I mean, you can see a PTA or a principal. But what is really exciting about our future is just using California, where you and I live, there's 3,200 schools in California, 3,200 secondary or high schools. That's $30 million of capital that we would be putting in the hands of kids. If I keep expanding that, there's 100,000 roughly K through 12 schools in America. Marshaling that combined resource would put $1 billion of capital in the hands of kids and enabling them to make changes in our society. That's pretty exciting for us. Now, there's even global opportunity. Participatory budgeting is endorsed by the United Nations. It actually started in Porto Alegre, Brazil, and it migrated into Europe and migrated into APAC. Now, people like me are bringing it into the United States and into schools and communities within the United States, which leads us into our plan, right? Our plan is we're launching our product, we hit break even, and then we scale operations. Now, it's always important for investors to know who's involved, who are the leaders of the team. There's me. I am an experienced entrepreneur I bootstrapped my last enterprise SaaS company and sold it very successfully. And I've been in the agile movement and the participatory budgeting movement for a decade. My head of product is Clint Gossett. He brings that fintech background from Visa, from Verifone. He's also worked at Automation Anywhere, one of the Silicon Valley unicorns. So he's been experienced not only with the fintech side of the business, but the high-tech growth. And investors want to invest in people with experience. So let's talk about our experience. When I founded Contenio, we were focused on building participatory budgeting solutions for global enterprises. And we secured customers like Cisco and eBay and Salesforce, brand names. Our clients eventually used our platform to make decisions on more than $3 billion in portfolio management. We sold that company to Scaled Agile, which is the world's leading method for software development in large enterprises. It's now being introduced to 20,000 business people each month. I completed my integration tasks at Scaled Agile because there's always a little bit of integration that's needed after an acquisition. And now I've started First Root to continue this work, but focus on the opportunity that's in schools. So thank you for letting me go through the deck and making sure that we had an opportunity to have a structured conversation. And now I'd really like to open it up to the Q&A and see what additional questions participants may have.
And thank you so much for that, Luke. And the questions have already begun to come in. So I'll just kind of start with the top here. Does the curriculum need to be approved by each state before they can allow it into a school?
It depends on the standards of the state. If a state has a set of standards for a given curriculum, then it does have to be approved by the state. So let's pick off just a few. And I'm not going to know every state by memory. I'm just going to know some of the states in which we're active. So in Wisconsin, they have personal financial curriculum standards as they do in Texas. So our curriculum needs to be approved, and we're building our curriculum already with support for Wisconsin and Texas standards. Other states like California that do not have a standard, the school district or the individual school is allowed to pick whatever they feel is appropriate. Now, the question then becomes, well, is there a national curriculum? Probably the best organization out there for a national curriculum is an organization called Jumpstart. And Jumpstart is a nonprofit that has defined a set of learning objectives by grade level that financial curriculum should honor. So we're honoring both the Jumpstart or all three of those standards thus far. We're looking at Jumpstart, Wisconsin, and Texas as our guides. So, and as we move into additional states and as we go through the curriculum verification process, we'll support those standards. That's not a particularly challenging part of the business. That's just kind of lining up the work and knocking it out.
That actually transitions really well into another question that came in. And so if that's not a large hurdle, what is the biggest hurdle to implementing this in a given school or school district?
The biggest hurdle is the belief that principals and teachers have all the answers. It's the adults. The adults basically, and this is kind of a balancing line because I know that teachers and principals are really essential, and we're not one of those AI companies that's trying to replace teachers. We're trying to help them be more effective. But I would say that the single biggest hurdle is the belief that the students aren't capable of this kind of decision making, right? And it's really just building trust. What we actually find, Eric, is that when you do the first PB cycle, people go, oh, this was new, this was novel. Now, how do we scale it? Because you build trust. And when you see what the kids actually fund at Hegel Elementary School in Madison, Wisconsin, the kids in the 5th grade got a new tree for their playground. At Fremont High School in in Sunnyvale, California, where I live, the kids bought more seating. At Purdue Polytechnic High School, they bought a library. They bought more infrastructure and books for an outside library. So it's really just having the adults build trust that the kids kind of know what they're doing.
No, that's actually a beautiful sentiment. So a question about the kind of the competitive landscape. So why is your solution better than other solutions or the current solution?
Well, that's that question is, it's funny when you're being disruptive in a given approach, you want to look at three kinds of things. At least in my experience, you want to look at three kinds of things. One is, what are you replacing? Two, what are you competing with? And three, what's brand new, where you're not replacing and you're not competing, it's just something new. So let's look at what we would be replacing. Right now, we do see hundreds of schools around the world doing participatory budgeting, but they're doing it by hand. They're doing it with manual processes. And Eric, what you see is people will do one program, they'll do a second program, and they get these good results, but then it's too hard. And there's that joke, right? Hey, there's an app for that, or there should be an app for that. Well, there's literally no app until we built it for participatory budgeting. So you see people, like, imagine the voting process. You go through and the kids create their proposals, and now they want to vote. Well, in the current processes for schools using in-person participatory budgeting, they got to print the ballot, they got to distribute the ballot, they got to collect the ballot, they got to count the ballot, and then they have to deal with ballots that are incomplete, ballots that are not filled out correctly. So what happens is the kids get all excited and then they go, oh, it was really good, but it was just too hard. And it's kind of like a school garden. A lot of schools will create a garden and then the garden goes into disuse because there's just, right? So what we've been focused on throughout our development is make it easy. And my team hears this so much, they probably get tired of hearing it, but it's always make it easy, make it easy, make it easy. And by making it easy, we can repeat use. So that's number one, is replacing that in-person PB process. Number two is competitors. So there are people who are out there who are offering competing products. People like, say, banks is one thing, right? Well, I've tested bank stuff with kids, and it's awful. You go to, say, I don't want to name a bank, but if you go to one of the bank's websites, you'll often see like build a budget with a kid, right? And I did this with my own children. I have 4 children, 2 in college, 2 in high school. And I just tried it out, right? And of course, this is not a statistically significant sample, but there's data behind this. We tried out from a very large New York-based bank, their teenage budget. The first 3 questions on the teenage budget was, what's your rent payment? What's your car payment? What's your car insurance? My daughter takes one, looks at this and goes, well, I don't pay rent. I don't have a car. This is stupid. It's just another adult writing stuff for an adult. Why don't they let kids do it? And that's the sentiment, right? Our competitors are doing drill and kill on stuff kids don't care about. And I'm going to pick on one because I know that we've got some people here who are wealthy because they're part of capital groups. One of the biggest mistakes that people do is they do stock market simulations. And here's how it goes. Here, kids, here's $100,000 of virtual currency. Put it in the stock market and see how much money you make. And those stock market simulations will range from, say, 3 months to 1 year. And sometimes they're even gamified, right? Where the person who makes the most money in the stock market in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months simulated wins a prize. Okay, let's think about what's really happening. You're teaching everything that's wrong about what we know about value-based investing, right? Value-based investing says you're making an investment in a company based on its fundamentals and where they are and where they're headed and what that opportunity is. When you're doing a stock market simulation, the way they do it in schools, you might as well go to Vegas and roll red 7 because you're teaching the kids how to gamble in the stock market. And so we've had a couple of instances where we've had to kind of go back and reteach the kids about what an investment is. And that's what First Root does. It lets the kids reason and argue about what kind of investment do they want to make in the school, who is affected, how are they affected, and why. So I kind of salivate when I think about going against our competitors in the market, because the competitors are not promoting things that are in the best interest of our kids, even though they mean to. And the last phase I said was new. And new is just the greenfield. As our society becomes aware of just how much economic inequality we have to overcome, we are truly seeing the desire for teaching financial literacy as a means to help all parts of our society become successful. We're starting to see a return to civics. We're seeing the polarization caused by social media. We're seeing the harmful effects of ad-driven politics. By putting this into schools and by having a conversation at a community level where the community is the school, kids can have a positive civic experience, something that is so desperately lacking in social media.
Thank you for taking the deep dive on that. I think that's really important for potential investors to know. And we're right around the halfway mark, so I do like to remind all the participants, thank you for coming. Thank you for engaging. These are really thoughtful questions. And I'd also remind you that you can go to netcapital.com and search First Root, where you can learn more. And of course, you can invest if you're inclined to do so. So circling back, continuing along with our scheduled programming here, people are asking, how big is the team? And I know you covered the team for a little bit, but have you seen some sales cycles and how long does it take on average? So I'm trying to combine a handful of questions into something that's comprehensive. So you want to dig into that, Luke? Thanks.
Yeah, and I can see the questions too, and I'm going to let you keep guiding me on which one we should answer. You know, we're a startup, right? So we've got a small but mighty team. So we've got 12 people. They're distributed around the world because every company in the modern world is distributed. But we have, you know, kind of, I learned in my last company, Contenio, how to be really capital efficient in terms of both building out sales and marketing in a capital efficient way, building out product in a capital efficient way. I don't want to sound overly promotional, but I am a globally recognized expert in agile software development. I know how to build software, and I know how to build it right, and I know how to get it done in a very efficient way. I've written 4 books. I was one of the founders of the first Agile conference. I've served on the board of the Agile Alliance. I've worked at all levels and scale of Agile software development. So one of the advantages that we have at First Root is we know how to build software, and we know how to build it right, and we know how to build it high quality. I'll give you an example of something I do differently, Eric, that is kind of surprising, but I don't have a separate QA function. So most software development that's done nowadays, they have developers write the code and then someone else test it. Our quality is so high that our developers have integrated automated testing and automated delivery pipelines called a CI/CD pipeline, so that as they're making changes, we're automatically running our software through thousands of tests and deploying that software automatically into production environments, kind of just like the big boys do. And so by engaging in this activity, we're able to keep our costs incredibly low, because one of the cost centers of a startup is support. And support is a cost center when you're not building good product. The other thing that we did, Eric, was even before we started writing code, we were doing usability testing with kids on our designs. So we have a fantastic designer, and we've done more than 50 usability studies on our product to help make sure that we're building something that the kids find easy to use. So it's a small team. Of course, we're going to grow, right? But we're going to grow at a pace that's appropriate for the market need.
That's great. Thanks for that. And how do you collect feedback on the app for your customers, and how often do you release live product updates? So it's a little early, but I think the feedback loop question is helpful.
Yeah. So we run a technique in the Agile community. It's called a retrospective. If you're more sales and marketing, you would call it a win-loss analysis. But we run retrospectives, especially with our earlier customers, at the beginning, when they're prepared, and at the end. So we send out surveys, and of course we incent the kids, right? So we do a market research incentive. We pay the kids $10 to give us the feedback to make sure that we get it. But we are doing surveys, we're doing usability tests, and we're also looking at the data generated by our application. So that's called telemetry data. So as our data is, as our application is being used, our server is collecting every event in the event stream from our customers. And then we analyze those events for patterns. And that gives us things like, oh, people aren't clicking on this button. Maybe it's in the wrong place. Maybe it's laid out incorrectly. Maybe it's the wrong language. So we use a variety of mechanisms to help us. And we even do live interaction. Today, Clint and I, before our Net Capital Q&A webinar, we were actually in a Zoom call with the students at Hegel Elementary School, listening to them and getting their feedback on our app as they were going through voting. So it was really fun to see fifth graders use our app and say, hey, Clint, this is what we do a lot of feedback, and it's actually quite fun.
That does sound like fun. I'm going to combine a couple questions here too to make sure that we can get to as many as possible. So people want to circle back to learn more about the market opportunity and market size. I think we could tie that into, is it possible to leverage this system internationally, abroad, and have schools outside of the US have shown interest in PB and first group, market size and international appeal?
Yeah, so let's talk about market size first. If you focus on the US market, there's about 56 million K through 12 students. That breaks down into about 36 million, 35, I'm gonna get the numbers wrong. I should probably go back to my slide, but it's about 36 million primary school students, which would be, and primary schools would be elementary and middle school, and about 26 million secondary school students. So the US market at $10 a student is more than $500 million. If you add in Europe, which is probably the next closest in terms of its size and its also ability to pay, and we're assuming that the price point for Europe will be about the same, that pushes it to about 900 million. If you add in the rest of the world and you discount the factor of growth rate and you discount some of the price points, the market is well over $1 billion. It's a sizable market. And if you actually look at our burn rate, so there is a question about burn rate, and we should roll that into the burn rate and break even. Our burn rate for a company about our size is about 60K a month. And the way I kind of run the company is it's about 50 to 60K a month. So for round numbers, and again, this is based on my experience in bootstrapping and selling my last company, an enterprise SaaS company, it's a round number of about $1 million. To have a fully functional company, you kind of need $1 million. So then you need at least $1 million in revenue. If you look at the average school size in the US as 528 students, we need 200 schools to break even. And our plan is to get to about 30 paying schools, 30 to 50 paying schools this coming school year, and then leverage that into our 200 minimum that we need to cover our burn. But we think we're, of course, we think we're going to do more. We think we've got a lot of opportunity with ESSER funding, with additional money flowing into schools and ed tech. So I think our burn is a very manageable burn, and we know how to manage our burn and scale.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for adding in the burn rate and break even as well. Some questions coming in. I want to think how to organize these a little bit. From a product standpoint, is the idea that the curriculum replaces other coursework, or is this kind of an addition to existing courses, or do the schools have to manage their programming around this? And I think you touched on that, but I'll let you dig a little deeper.
Yeah, so the question becomes, how does a school integrate First Root into their program. So I'm going to try and use my two hands here. This hand is our app. Our app can be used standalone for any school that wants to do participatory budgeting. And you see this in New York State, for example, in New York City, you've got schools doing participatory budgeting and they don't worry about the curriculum. They just want to get the kids engaged. They want to give the kids a voice. They're not worrying about the financial literacy or civics curriculum. This hand represents our curriculum. It wraps around our product. So if you want the curriculum, it's optional, but it requires the product, but the product does not require the curriculum. So that lets teachers adopt it, and it lets schools adopt our program without having a big complex adoption sequence with curriculum. Now, for schools that are having an existing curriculum, we would be a replacement, but we think we've got a lot more compelling thing to offer from a standpoint of the curriculum supported by an app that lets kids have a project-based learning outcome.
Awesome. And circling back to the market again, can you go into your total addressable market, maybe even your serviceable market?
I'm not sure if I understand the question. I mean, honestly, if there's a kid in a school, public or private, charter or not charter, they're part of our target market, right? It's a question of when we get to them. In terms of our market strategy, and this is part of our offering. I didn't put it in the deck, but it's a prominent part of our Net Capital offering. And I'm going to give a shout out to the Net Capital team. They were very helpful in making sure we had the right information on our offering page. But we have also started the First Root School Fund. And we are taking a portion of the funds that we're raising at Net Capital, plus a portion of our future profits, and we're using it to seed participatory budgeting programs in economically disadvantaged schools. So one of the main problems in America is that we've got huge gaps in the funding of schools. And so one of the questions from Dahlia at shaper.com is, how do we make sure that we get this into the schools that's needed? Well, our First Root School Fund was created to give Title I schools a help in getting participatory budgeting started, because once participatory budgeting has started, we actually see that the schools get involved and parents get involved, and they start making these donations in very targeted ways. So we think that this is a really exciting part of our business, and we hope over time that we can continue to grow that part of our business.
Yeah, absolutely, Luke. And you talked about getting to 200 schools, and that's part of your break-even analysis. What's the plan to scale to that number? Are there some details you could share?
Yeah, there's three primary parts to our plan to go to market and scale. Primary part one is build a good product, right? I know it sounds obvious, but we have our kids starting to post what they're doing in social media. We have teachers starting to share, hey, look at this thing I did. It's really cool. And our kids loved it. So, if the kids hate our product, right, then we're like all the other ed tech companies where we force the kids to use awful ed tech software. And for anyone in the ed tech space, it's really frightening how bad the software is. So number one is we really do believe that product-led growth is foundational to Silicon Valley scale. The second is partnerships. We're in discussions right now with Rotary International through their Interact program, where Rotary puts programs of students in schools to help improve the school, and 4-H. So we've got a director of strategic partnerships who's working on using Rotary and 4-H as part of our channel to reach schools. So that's the second part. And the third part is helping leaders realize that with the existing funding from the government in ESSER funding, that ESSER funding boils down into two basic buckets: improve the school environment, help especially low-income and minority kids recover from learning loss because of COVID. First Root fits both of those things. So as we reach people they're going to be aware of these opportunities, and that's part of our growth strategy. Now, one final thing is we're also running our first conference on June 22nd. And that conference is global in nature. We're going to run it for 24 hours, starting GMT time 0. And speakers from around the world are going to talk about participatory budgeting in schools. And to Angela Wick's point, one of her questions was about mental and health and coping skills. Angela, if you look at the World Health Organization and the definition of health, it's not the absence of disease, right? The definition of health includes community health, physical health, spiritual health, social, emotional health, mental health. And you can't really have appropriate mental health when you're in an environment of financial stress and over financial stress. So by teaching financial literacy, and we saw this in the very first slide I presented in today's call, was this notion of, we know that economic and wealth inequality are correlated to mental health. So now I'm going to add one more thing. Scott Farber is a recognized leader of mental health in children, and he's going to be one of our speakers at our conference, and he's going to talk about the relationship between financial literacy, financial equity, and mental health.
Thank you, Luke, and I appreciate you getting to some of those other questions. I think those are great. And you sort of talk about partnerships with Rotary and other organizations, but continuing along the partnership conversation, any plans or visions to integrate with other ed tech platforms where school admins and kids and parents already use the app almost daily?
Absolutely. I mean, there are, so, even though I've talked about how awful some of those platforms are, the reality is there is there's an undeniable ecosystem of school platforms. There's Google Classroom, there's Schoology, there's the learning management systems, there's Moodle, there's a whole set of alphabet soup of relationships that are out there. And those are things that in my experience when I was at Centennial, is you do a little bit of pre-work, but mostly you take those as they come, because there's a pattern for solving them. So, at Centennial, we implemented single sign-on, and as you add each customer, right, you kind of click in that next thing that they need. So we know that those things are coming, but we're going to work with our school system partners to determine which of those integrations are needed, and then we'll just build them. That's not a complex or high risk endeavor.
Thank you. So I'm going to be thoughtful of time. Last couple of moments here, and I want to allocate some time towards the end, Luke, for you to have some kind of closing remarks. So, why is now the perfect time to come in as an investment? So I'm giving you a little bit of a spoiler right there, give you a heads up. But before we get there, people are asking, what time period does this investment cover? What are the plans for follow-up rounds?
Well, this is actually part of the summary of why invest now. If you look at our trajectory and you look at my background, I was able to start the company with some angel rounds through a convertible promissory note. The details are in the Net Capital prospectus, but those angel investors are pretty prominent people in the Agile community and in the startup community. So Alexander Osterwalder, who's known for the business model Canvas and the strategizer work, he's an investor. Vern Harnish, who's known as one of the world's foremost experts on scaling companies, he's an investor. In the Agile community, we've got people like Lisa Adkins, who's one of the world's foremost coaches. We've got Carol McCune, who used to be the CEO of Scrum Alliance, which is one of the world's largest groups of Agile people. So those angels gave us a foundation. I actually had some VCs reach out, Eric, and they're like, hey, we want to take you into a Series A. And I was thinking about that, but I really wanted to go with Net Capital for the very explicit choice of making sure that our values opened up to the wider community the opportunity to invest in a social impact investment. We definitely want to make a financial return, but we also want to have a positive social return. And I just honestly, Eric, had, I've got something like 28,000 connections on LinkedIn, right? I have been around the world delivering agile and helping people be successful. And I wanted to give that community an opportunity to join in on this journey with me. And we already have investors from around the world. We've got investors in Latin America, in Europe, in India, in America. So the reason why I would really recommend to investors to invest now is this is probably the last chance to invest, because the next round of investment is going to be a traditional Series A round with traditional kind of Silicon Valley professional investors coming in, which are fantastic. It's what Net Capital gives us is a new way to manage growth and acquire capital for growth. So it's really exciting, and that's why people should invest now, because there may not be another chance until there's an exit for First Root.
Thank you for that, Luke. And so that gives us a little bit more time back, and so we could dig into one piece that is critically important to what you've been able to do is you have tons of progress so far, and I'd love to hit on a couple more of those major accomplishments, and then what are your next major milestones? What does the future look like outside of that kind of fundraising strategy product that you already covered just now?
Sure. Well, yeah, the accomplishments are existential first, right? We created a company, we stood up a product, we've got pilots. And, one of the things that you sometimes hear, Eric, in the startup community is, what's your MVP, like your minimum viable product? Well, in ed tech, the minimum viable product actually has to be fairly solid, right? It's got to be low bugs. It's got to support multiple languages right off the bat. You can't go to an American school and not support Spanish or other languages, for example. In San Jose, California, 20% of the population are Vietnamese. So, if we're going to go into San Jose, California, we have to support Vietnamese so the kids can use the software with their parents. And so we've built a scalable back end, a gorgeous front end with great feedback and pilots. Our next milestone is moving into a true revenue generation capability where teachers can self-serve, get access to the classroom via a credit card. Schools can start to use it via a purchase card, which is a price point that they can afford, and then moving into the scaling within a school district. Those are both some accomplishments and some future plans. I think the other thing that we're really excited about is just seeing what happens as the kids continue to make their investment choices. It's always a surprise what the kids do. And I want to close by making sure we answer the question of the anonymous attendee that says, what happens with the proposals that do not receive the most votes? And this is part of how I parent, but my parenting, Eric, is I don't believe that life comes with rubber bumpers. I think life comes with sometimes mistakes. And sometimes, my kids and I talk about, when I make investments, I don't always make the best choices. I've got a couple of power tools in my garage gathering dust. And so the question that I ask parents who are wondering about whether they should get behind First Root is, where do you want your kids to make a mistake? Do you want them to have no actual experience with money until they get their first job or until they are in college and they make a mistake on a credit card? Or do you want them to have that opportunity to talk about things, to talk about money in school, supported by a teacher who can help them reason about things? And, Eric, we've done programs in middle schools. And sure, the kids make goofy ideas. Like one idea in a middle school was, we should have a duck pond. You're not going to put a duck pond in the middle of your school, right? But the other kids talked about it and said, okay, that's a silly idea. We don't want it. So, not every proposal gets voted on, but that's part of democracy. We can't do, we all have these many ideas and we have this much budget. And I don't care if it's your marketing campaign. If I went to the Net Capital team and I said, hey, Net Capital Marketing, how much, how many ideas do you have to promote Net Capital? They'd say, I've got this much. And I'd say, how much budget do you have? And they'd say, I got this much. We need to teach that awareness that these choices are made in conversation with other people. So what happens to the proposals that don't receive the most votes? They may come back the next year or the next cycle, or they may be replaced by better ideas. But that's part of life. That's part of the learning.
Thanks for that, Luke. I think you covered so much there. I enjoyed every second of it. And so you mentioned agile software development, and you are a clear-cut expert in that space. So how are you building FirstRoot? How does your agile software experience impact your build of FirstRoot?
Could I get one of the attendees who, like Jeff or Scott or someone, could you post into the chat session the link to the Startup Safe article? I actually described in the SAFE community, which again is that community of the world's largest software development teams, how we built FirstRoot, right? And there's three components. You want to build the right thing, you want to build it the right way, and you want to build it for the right reason. So the reason is easy, right? We're fighting economic inequality and we're promoting financial literacy and civic engagement. That's the reason. That's a good reason. Building the right thing is understanding through customer centricity and design thinking what we need to build. Building the right way is building the right back-end architecture, the back-end infrastructure, the back-end scale that we need to support a global community. So we're building the right thing, the right way, for the right reason. And for the attendees, if you want to learn more about how we're doing it, I published an article because we're very open about how we do things, and I put it out there. Thanks, Jeff.
And actually, I saw Jeff raise his hand, so I gave him permission to talk, but I think it was just to point to that article. So I think we're all set on that. I'm going to go ahead and then remove Jeff from our little party here.
Okay.
Thanks for that, Jeff. These conversations I feel like would be remiss without at least discussing the impacts of COVID and the recovery from it. So if we can, I know we have a couple moments, and maybe there's not enough time to really get into the deeps of it, but what are some of the risks you're facing? How has COVID impacted your business, and how do you expect a transition out of COVID impact your business as well?
Well, COVID was actually one of the reasons I started FirstRoot, because I was seeing this great progression of participatory budgeting in business, and I had built this fantastic platform for business, and I was monitoring what was going on in schools and supporting it where I could. For example, there's a nonprofit known as pbscotland.org, which is promoting participatory budgeting in Scotland. There's another website, youthpb.eu, that promotes participatory budgeting in Europe. In America, I mentioned Phoenix Union and some of the schools in Chicago that were doing participatory budgeting. So, I was excited. When COVID hit, all of those programs stopped because they didn't know how to do in-person PB in the time of COVID. And they were cobbling together solutions that weren't standards compliant. So they're not honoring COPA, they're not honoring FERPA. The students are struggling with spreadsheets. They don't know how to use the software. It doesn't support them in voting. It's too hard to use. And I said, I think there's this really fantastic opportunity to create a business that will create, again, a financial return and a social impact because of COVID, right? We need better ed tech, better tech that supports kids in the time of COVID, collaborating and making a difference. Now, as we come out of COVID, what we're seeing is kids now have greater access to devices. So we're seeing these blended environments where they want the best of an in-person experience supported by online tools that let them work. So today in my LinkedIn feed, I posted a picture of what's happening at Hegel Elementary School. Some of the kids are still at home. Some of the kids are in the classroom. All of them were discussing and using the FirstRoot platform to vote on their ideas. And I think that that's the future of blended learning, of blended environments. So COVID, in a sense, created an opportunity for our company. And as we recover from COVID, and of course, the recovery is very uneven, right? The US is doing well. Other parts of the world, notably India, which gets a lot of press because of the number of people, they're not doing so well. So we think as we expand the impact of COVID will create opportunities for people who know how to manage blended environments.
Thank you, Luke. And you mentioned COPA and a couple other like regulatory burdens that affect your industry. But like in a broader sense, how do you ensure that the app is safe for children?
Yeah, that is clearly, as a father, I see what our kids can get exposed to through social media, and some of it's just awful, right? So all student-generated content is run through various filtering mechanisms. So when students upload a photo of their idea, for example, it's run through Amazon image recognition before it's posted into the app. If it's even remotely considered potentially offensive or dangerous, it's immediately flagged and quarantined. Teachers have tools necessary to review those. We have tools to review those. If a student violates some aspect of a term of service, we think of that as a learning opportunity for the teachers, but we will, put the student into in a sense, a timeout. They're suspended. So students are, managed. When students post videos, we actually have them post the video into YouTube. So we have the extra layer of YouTube's review of the video. So we're very sensitive to the notion of content safety. Then there is access safety. So teachers and administrators have control over which students are allowed in what PB cycle. So if you've got even multiple cycles running in the same school, like one for the band and one for the football team or the dance team, those individual communities are allocated to their own cycles and maintained separately. So there's again, it's take a person who bootstrapped and sold a successful enterprise SaaS company who had to deal with Cisco and eBay and Transamerica and BMW security requirements and put that into schools. There's nothing that the schools are throwing us that is harder than what Cisco threw at us, right? So we know how to do this. GDPR, COPA, FERPA, et cetera, and compliance and safety is baked into our DNA. Oh, I'll throw in one more thing, Eric, just for fun. I used to be head of engineering and product management for an Israeli security firm. So if you want to know security, hang out with the Israelis.
And on that note, Luke, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing with us about First Root. I want to thank all the participants who came in and asked very thoughtful questions. I hope that we were able to we got to all of them. So I hope you enjoyed that feedback. Luke, you should note before we wrap up, somebody has offered to help you expand it to Indonesia. So you might want to take them up with that offer. So that's always fun.
I got the name, Scott Evans. I'm going to track him down and get him involved.
Perfect. I'd love to see the connections happen in real time. So thank you, Scott. And then lastly, as always, this has been recorded and it will be uploaded to Net Capital's YouTube account. I've added a link to that in the chat. And of course, at the very top of the chat, you can see the link directly to the Net Capital offering page. And that's netcapital.com, search for First Root. So thank you so much for everybody who came in and asked your questions. Thank you, Luke, for providing the time to allow people to better understand First Root. And I hope everybody enjoyed their time and has a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.